In the last session together, we saw that the background for a lot of what I will be sharing came out of my struggle to refute Christianity. And in that struggle, I came to the conclusion that the resurrection is an historical fact, that Christ was crucified, buried, and literally raised from the dead on the third day. I didn't want to believe that, but I ended up believing it. In the book of Matthew, chapter 27, it says that Christ died of crucifixion. Crucifixion was probably one of the most cruel deaths that anyone could ever face. And this is something that the Jews feared. And to the Jew, to be crucified, to be hanged on a tree, was to be cursed of God. Now, before they crucified someone, they would often whip them. And it tells about, in the scriptures, that they took and they flogged, they whipped Jesus after the verdict that he should be killed and buried. Now, the customary way of whipping was they had a long handle about this long, and tied into the end of the handle were a number of leather strips going out. At the end of the leather strips, they would take one of two things, either jagged bone or sharp pieces of rock, and they would strike them like this, and then when it would hit the back, they would yank the whip down. And what that would do is start to unravel the skin on the back of the prisoner. Then after the whipping, it says they put on him a crown of thorns. And they would take from a bush that had thorns about this long, and they would push it or crush it onto the person's head so the thorns would protrude into the skin and the muscle area. Then remember, the Word of God says that Jesus was forced to carry not his cross, but the cross bar. That is normally what happened. Now that is possibly what Christ did, and yet maybe Christ carried or pulled out the entire cross. Then it says that spikes, large nails, were driven into his hands, right here in his wrist, and into his feet. Well, most crosses had a little seat called a sedecula. And this little seat the person could sit on portionally. And the way they would survive when they were being crucified for a while is that they would push up and they would let the air out. And then they'd take air in and go down. So when they wanted to bring about death early, they would break their legs where they couldn't push up. And then the person died of their own air. And yet, Jesus, because of the whipping and what he had gone through, was already dead. So they didn't need to break his legs. And this is interesting because the Old Testament prophecy was not a bone in his body would be broken. And then it says that they thrust a spear into his side. And that was often a way of confirming the death and making sure the person was dead. And when they thrust the spear into Christ's side, it says blood and water came out separated. I have read many, many medical investigations of this, and every one of them says that when that happens, and they explain why it is separated, blood and water, but that is the surest sign of death when the two come out separated. The Romans had 4 different executioners, and why? Each one of these executioners had to sign the death warrant. And so when they did take Christ down from the cross, they knew he was dead. 4 executioners had signed his death warrant. He was crucified. They took him down. They prepared him for burial and placed him in a tomb. In the next session, I want to start out by describing what the tomb looked like and then what happened after he was buried, and see some of the theories that try to explain away the resurrection. But one thing is for sure historically. On the third day, the tomb was empty. And as one of the hymns say, He is risen, He is risen. He is risen indeed.